Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
It was a typical Wednesday evening when my life took an unexpected turn. I'd just finished a grueling day at the office, dealing with demanding clients and looming deadlines. All I wanted was to get home, kick off my shoes, and relax with a cold beer. Little did I know, I was about to embark on a months-long battle with my homeowners association that would test my patience, drain my wallet, and ultimately change my living situation entirely. I live, or should I say, lived in a gated condo complex in New York. You know the type. Manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, and a sense of security provided by a guard-operated gate at the entrance. I'd been living there for about 3 years, and while I occasionally grumbled about the HOA fees, I generally appreciated the well-maintained community. As I approached the entrance that fateful evening, I noticed the usual rush-hour traffic. Cars were lined up, inching forward as the guard waved them through. It was a familiar scene. The guard would typically wave through multiple cars at once during peak hours to keep things moving. I'd never given it much thought before. I was about 4 cars back when the line started moving. We all rolled forward, following the guard's gestures. As my turn came, I started to drive through the gate. That's when it happened. In a split second, the gate came down, striking the side of my car with a sickening crunch. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. The guard looked shocked, immediately raising the gate and rushing over. "Are you okay?" he asked, his face pale. I nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. We both surveyed the damage, a long, deep scratch along the side of my car, with a noticeable dent where the gate had made impact. "I'm so sorry," the guard stammered. "I thought I had more time before the gate came down." "I'll report this right away." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "It's okay," I said, even though I knew it wasn't. "These things happen. I'll report it to the HOA as well." As soon as I got home, I called the property management office and left a detailed message about the incident. I also sent an email to the HOA board explaining what had happened and requesting that they file a claim with their insurance. I even attached photos of the damage that I'd taken at the scene. The next morning, I got a call that would set the tone for the next few months of my life. It was from Sandra, the administrative assistant for the HOA. From the moment she started speaking, I could tell this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I'm calling about the incident you reported last night. I'm afraid I have some bad news for you." I braced myself. "What's that?" "The HOA will not be assuming any liability for the damage to your vehicle," she stated matter-of-factly. "The entire incident was your fault." I was stunned. "My fault? How could it possibly be my fault?" "The guard waved me through." Sandra's voice took on an even more patronizing tone. "Mr. Johnson, there is a stop sign at the gate. You are required to come to a full stop and wait for the gate to open completely before proceeding. By piggybacking through the gate, you violated our community rules and traffic laws." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but the guard was waving cars through, multiple cars at a time. "That's how it's always done during rush hour. If you misinterpreted the guard's signals, that's on you," Sandra replied coldly. "Besides, are you even a resident here? I don't recall seeing your name on our list." Now I was getting angry. "Of course I'm a resident. I've lived here for 3 years, and I didn't misinterpret anything. I have video of the guard waving cars through." "Well, Mr. Johnson, regardless of what you think you saw, the HOA will not be taking responsibility for your failure to follow the rules. Have a nice day." And with that, she hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, fuming. How dare they try to pin this on me? I knew I needed help, so I decided to consult a lawyer. The next day, I met with Mark Stevens, a local attorney who specialized in property disputes. I explained the situation to him, showing him the photos and video I had taken. Mark listened intently, nodding as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Well, Mr. Johnson, I have to say I disagree with the HOA's assessment. Based on what you've told me and the evidence you've provided, I believe you have a strong case." "Really?" I felt a glimmer of hope. "Absolutely," Mark continued. "First of all, if there's no posted rule about waiting for the gate to close between each car, you had no reason to ignore the guard's directions. Your video clearly shows the guard waving multiple cars through without closing the gate. That's standard practice, as you said." I nodded, feeling vindicated. "Furthermore," Mark added, "the fact that the administrative assistant is handling this instead of the board is concerning. You have the right to communicate directly with the board about such matters." We discussed strategy. and Mark advised me to send a formal demand letter to both the HOA and the security company. He helped me draft the letter, which included a detailed account of the incident, references to the photo and video evidence, and a demand for the $1,600 to cover the cost of repairs. A week later, I received a response from the HOA, or rather, from Sandra. The letter essentially reiterated what she had told me on the phone, that I was at fault, that they wouldn't assume any liability, and that they refused to file a claim or allow me to see any security footage from the incident. What infuriated me most was that the letter was clearly written by Sandra, not the board. It was filled with the same condescending language she had used on the phone. I was being stonewalled by an administrative assistant who seemed to think she ran the whole show. I went back to Mark with the letter. He shook his head as he read it. "This is unacceptable," he said. "They're not following proper procedures, and they're denying you your rights as a homeowner. I think we need to take this to small claims court." I hesitated. "Do you really think that's necessary? I'm worried about retaliation." Mark looked at me seriously. "Mr. Johnson, you have a right to be compensated for damages that weren't your fault. If we don't stand up to them now, who knows what they might try to get away with in the future." He had a point. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, let's do it." The next few weeks were a flurry of preparation. We gathered all the evidence, including the photos, videos, copies of the emails and letters, and even statements from a few neighbors who had witnessed similar incidents at the gate. Finally, the court date arrived. I was nervous as I entered the courtroom, but Mark's confident presence beside me was reassuring. To my surprise, Sandra showed up to represent the HOA. I couldn't help but wonder why none of the actual board members had bothered to come. The judge listened patiently as both sides presented their cases. Sandra tried to argue that I had violated community rules and traffic laws, but her argument fell apart when the judge asked to see the specific rule about waiting for the gate to close. Of course, there was no such written rule. When we presented the video evidence of the guard waving multiple cars through, the judge's eyebrows raised. He asked Sandra several pointed questions about the HOA's policies and procedures, which she struggled to answer. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. He ordered the HOA to pay for the damages to my car, plus court costs. As we left the courtroom, I felt a huge sense of relief and vindication. Mark patted me on the back, congratulating me on the win. But my relief was short-lived. About 2 weeks after the court case, I received a notice from the HOA. It was a fine for $50 for having my trash cans out too early on garbage day. I was confused. I always put my cans out at the same time, and I'd never been fined before. A few days later, another fine arrived. This time, it was for $100 for a small garden gnome on my porch, which they claimed violated the community's aesthetic guidelines. I'd had that gnome for 2 years without issue. It quickly became clear what was happening. The HOA was retaliating against me for winning the court case. Over the next month, I received fines for everything from the length of my grass, which I meticulously maintained, to the color of my curtains, which hadn't changed since I moved in. I went back to Mark, showing him the stack of fines I'd accumulated. He shook his head in disbelief. "This is blatant harassment," he said. "We need to take them back to court." So once again, we prepared for battle. This time I was suing the HOA for harassment and retaliatory fines. I meticulously documented every fine, took photos to show that other residents weren't being held to the same standards, and even got statements from neighbors who thought the whole thing was ridiculous. Our second day in court was even more satisfying than the first. The judge was visibly appalled by the HOA's behavior. He not only ordered them to cease the fines immediately, but also awarded me damages for the harassment. As we left the courthouse, Mark turned to me. "You know," he said, "you might want to consider moving. Living under this HOA is clearly becoming untenable." I nodded, realizing he was right. As much as I loved my condo, the stress of dealing with the HOA was taking its toll. That weekend, I started looking at houses in non-HOA neighborhoods. It took a few months, but I finally found the perfect place. A charming house with a big yard in a friendly neighborhood with no HOA in sight. The day I moved in felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Now, as I sit on my porch, complete with garden gnome, I reflect on the whole ordeal. It was stressful, time-consuming, and at times infuriating. But it also taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself, the importance of documentation, and the power of persistence. Most importantly, it led me to a place where I feel truly at home, free from arbitrary rules and power-tripping administrators. Sometimes a setback can lead you exactly where you need to be. And in my case, that's a home where the only person who can fine me for my gnome collection is my disapproving mother-in-law. This HOA is a classic example of how power can corrupt even the most mundane community organizations. I can't believe they tried to pin the gate incident on you when it was clearly the guard's fault, and then to have the audacity to fine you for ridiculous things like putting your trash out a few minutes early. Talk about petty revenge. It's like they're running some kind of dictatorship instead of a community. The fact that an administrative assistant seems to be calling all the shots is just bizarre. Where's the actual board in all of this? I'm glad you stood up for yourself and took them to court, but it's insane that you had to go through all that hassle just to get what was rightfully yours. Moving out was definitely the right call. No one should have to live under that kind of stress and constant scrutiny. HOAs might have their place, but when they start acting like playground bullies, it's time to get out. Good on you for finding a place without an HOA. Enjoy your freedom and your garden gnomes. This story is a perfect example of why HOAs are the worst. They're supposed to maintain property values, but all they really do is harass homeowners and waste money on pointless lawsuits. The fact that this person had to go to court twice just to be treated fairly is ridiculous. And then the HOA had the nerve to retaliate with bogus fines? That's straight-up abuse of power. It's no wonder so many people are looking for homes without HOAs these days. Who wants to deal with that kind of stress? I bet if more people knew what they were getting into with HOAs, they'd think twice before buying in those communities. I'm honestly shocked at how unprofessional this HOA sounds. The fact that all communication was going through an administrative assistant instead of the actual board members is a huge red flag. Where's the accountability? And the way they handled the initial incident with the gate is just appalling. Instead of taking responsibility and filing an insurance claim like they should have, they tried to gaslight the homeowner into thinking it was their fault. That's not just bad management, it's borderline fraud. The retaliation after losing in court is what really gets me though. Fining someone for having a garden gnome that's been there for years? Come on. That's not about maintaining the community. That's about power and control. It's clear this HOA has lost sight of its purpose and is just abusing its authority. I'm glad the homeowner stood their ground and eventually moved out, but it's sad that it had to come to that. HOAs need to be held accountable for this kind of behavior. Maybe there should be some kind of oversight committee for HOAs to prevent this sort of abuse. Until then, I guess the only solution is to avoid HOAs altogether. The incompetence of this HOA is staggering. An administrative assistant handling all communications instead of the board, that's a recipe for disaster and a clear violation of proper procedures. No wonder they're making such terrible decisions. The board members are probably too lazy to do their actual jobs and are letting some power-tripping secretary run the show. This is a perfect example of why HOAs need more oversight and regulation. Without it, you end up with this kind of kangaroo court nonsense.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.